Visitors to London could be forgiven for thinking that they're seeing a quintessentially British town. The imperial architecture, the iconic black taxis and red phone boxes. But behind these picture postcard images, London is one of the most multicultural capitals in the world. More than a third of Londoners belong to a minority ethnic group and speak one of the 200 different languages in this city of 8 million. Nowhere is this more apparent than in London's East End, an area that has seen centuries of migration. Food has played a unique role in the integration of these new arrivals. Migrants may lose their language, their customs, even their religion, but seldom their food. Food is more often than not the gift they bring to their new home. In East London, one road in particular tells this familiar story.
This is street food, and this is Brick Lane. Brick Lane, or Bangla Town, is at the heart of Britain's Bangladeshi community. They're the latest in a long line of migrants who have made Brick Lane their home. Unlike the peoples before them, they've brought their own distinct mark, dare I say flavour, to this part of London.
I think the popularity is because the spices. I think spicy is like, I'm not going to say drug. Once you taste curry, you can't get away from it. It becomes a normal thing. In the weekend, Friday, Saturdays, you go out, you have a curry and a beer.
Curry has become Britain's national dish, and Brick Lane its unofficial capital. But the Bangladeshis are new arrivals to an area that has seen many communities come and go. The East End has long been the first port of call for new arrivals. Cheap accommodation downwind and downriver from what Londoners call simply the city, the financial heart of London, is still the most expensive real estate in Europe. In the 18th century, Protestant Huguenots fled religious persecution in France, arriving in London's East End to build new homes and an imposing church on what was then marchland. But today, only an inscription on the facade remains to record their presence. Umbra sumos, we are shadows. In the 19th century, migration made London the biggest city in the world as the docks, warehouses and factories of the East End expanded to process the wealth flowing in from the British Empire. The docks have long since been converted into office space, and the last remaining cranes are now museum pieces. The warehouses have become expensive flats and the factories, fashionable bars and clubs. Only the street food remains as it was in the past. Paul Simpson's family have been selling the same food for 90 years to the working men and women of the East End. Cheap food from the muddy waters of the nearby Thames.
It's just an old traditional East End food. People have been eating them for so long, they just keep coming back. Yeah, whelks, like a sea snail. You can make curries with them, or stir fries or things, or just eat them like that.
The original Tubby Isaacs was Jewish, a strange choice of career, since eels, cockles and whelks are not acceptable or kosher according to Jewish dietary law.
My family were Jewish, well, my ancestors were Jewish. I mean, we're not now actually, but sort of fell out of it. But so yeah, well, it's not kosher food, so Orthodox Jews couldn't eat it. But there was a lot of Jews that weren't Orthodox who loved it. So around this area, that's what we have. And then now it's like Bengalis, but they don't really eat this food, I must admit.
So what's your most famous food here?
Jelly dills. They're just the best thing we sell. Famous for it, so you've got to try them.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's a meaty texture, but it's a very strong fishy taste, so it's a bit sort of a cross between meat and fish.
But it's quite juicy, which is really quite nice.
When cooked, the eels, which are a type of fish, sweat out their juices, which set into a thick jelly. When eels were still the staple of the working man, stalls such as this covered the East End. Today, only Tubby Isaacs remains.
There's a lot of people moved out around here. I suppose they can't make money, so they've had to give up. There's only one left. It's just economics, I suppose. It's just the way it is. Where we might go soon ourselves.
Tubby Isaacs represents a unique link to the area's past. A Jewish East Ender who sold traditional street food. A link to both a people and a way of life that have all but disappeared from Brick Lane and its surroundings.
Little evidence remains today of the thriving Jewish community which made the East End their home. But if you look carefully and closely enough at certain buildings like this school, you'll see signs of Brick Lane's Jewish past.
But for the most part, the faded shop fronts are all that remains of a street that was once at the centre of the Jewish East End, the adoptive home of many of the 100,000 Eastern European Jews who fled to Britain following their persecution in Russia in the 1880s. Alan Dean is a journalist and historian who has spent much of his life documenting Brick Lane's Jewish past in an attempt to ensure that the area's rich history is not forgotten. His own grandparents fled persecution in Russia and settled in the East End. His uncle Lou worked in Bloom's, the last kosher restaurant in the area, which closed its doors in 1992.
Bloom's restaurant had been founded in the 1930s. It was a busy, bustling Jewish restaurant. Not only was it popular with Jewish people, but it was popular with East Enders in general. It was the flavour of East London in that part of the 1930s and 1940s. Just like today, people come up and down Brick Lane to sample the curries, the curry houses of East London. People came to Bloom's from all over to sample what they called Jewish food, Hamisher food, home from the Haim, home from the home, the old Jewish home. But what we have to also think about when we look back at the Jewish community, or the history of the Jewish community in East London, most of the food was sold on the street. A very famous lady called Bagel Annie, and she would sit on the floor with the bagels all around her, and people would come up to her and buy the bagels from literally in the street. Street food, the street hustle was what it was all about.
Despite the popularity of Bloom's and the vibrant Jewish community, there were many who resented the intrusion into the East End of these new migrants, competing for jobs and housing. Suspicion, mistrust and rumours were quick to spread. When the infamous Jack the Ripper murders took place in the streets around Brick Lane in 1888, word spread that these killings were the work of newly arrived Jews, perhaps even one of the new kosher butchers that had set up shop in the area. The murders were never solved, but the rumours highlighted a dark undercurrent of social tension and xenophobia in the area.
From the time that the big wave of new settlers arrived in the East End of London in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, there was what is known as anti-alienism. People were not happy with new arrivals. People were saying they were taking their jobs and so forth. But also for the Jewish community who lived at the south end of Brick Lane, wandering north past the railway bridge, this old railway bridge, further down towards Bethnal Green, you were actually going into what was known as fascist territory. And it would be difficult. So people became very clannish. They stayed within their patch. If you wandered off your patch into the wrong area, you could be beaten up for being Jewish.
Today, a man sells samosas on the spot where the black shirts of the British Union of Fascists once stood. The Jewish community has gone, not because it was driven out, but instead because of a natural process of integration.
What you found then, you find now. The older generation, the first arrivals, tended to stick to their world. That was the world they knew. If you were a youngster born in London, whether you're Jewish or Bangladeshi or Somalian, wherever you're from, you adapt. You have a bit of your old world with your new world. And that was certainly the case with the Jewish community. The youngsters wanted to be Cockneys, they wanted to be East Enders, they wanted to box, they wanted to play football, they wanted to go to clubs, they wanted to listen to jazz music. They didn't all want to go to the synagogue. They didn't all want to just eat Jewish food.
Did we ever get a period whereby some of the Jewish cuisine started taking a bit from the English cuisine at all?
Fish and chips, one of the most famous British foods, was first sold by a Jewish restaurateur on the Whitechapel Road. And what's very interesting is the assimilation of Jewish food into English cuisine. 25 years ago, if you said a bagel, they would not know whether it was bread, fish or meat. They had no idea what it was. But that's part of the cultural assimilation.
On Brick Lane, the bagel remains a symbol of this assimilation. Bread cooked in an alien fashion, shaped like a ring, boiled in water and baked in a special oven.
I came to the East End of London in 1958 after my army, 2.5 years in the army, in the Israeli army. And we're looking for something better in life to do, you know. And then we came to Brick Lane. and we saw people baking bread and bagel, the old people, and we learned from them how to make. And that's why we established ourselves in Brick Lane, because it's a very, very famous Jewish area.
Sami is a reminder that the area was once home to a thriving Jewish community. And he insists that the bagel can still hold its own against the challenge from the curry houses in the Brick Lane of today.
The bagel was here before the Indian came from India and brought the tradition with them. So in other words, people knew about the bagel before the curry and all this. With the bagel, it's something light. People don't like to get involved with heavy meal, especially during the night. That's why we're very busy during the night. And they come here and eat bagel with filled-in bagel.
Sami is 70 and shows no sign of slowing down. He visits his bakery every evening to ensure his bagels are fresh and his customers are happy. The bagels are no longer officially kosher, and the clientele is no longer Jewish. But Sami's salt beef bagels, like Tubby's jellied eels, continue to outlive the communities that created them.
The way of life has changed completely in the East End. You get people more relaxed, more happy. You pop in during the night, you see the queue along the shop, and you see a big tail, and people keep asking me, why are you busy all the time? I say people like to follow the tail. When they see a big tail, they like to follow it, and that's a fact.